The Nimitz Tic-Tac Encounter. On November 14, 2004, off the coast of California, near a naval carrier strike group operating in restricted military airspace over the Pacific Ocean, multiple U.S. Navy pilots encountered an object that officially remains unidentified to this day. An incident that would become known throughout military aviation circles as the Tic-Tac Encounter, named after the object's striking resemblance to the popular breath mint candy. Except this breath mint was roughly 45 feet across and defied every known principle of aerodynamic flight, every law of physics that governed the machines these pilots operated. The Navy pilots involved, including Squadron Commander David Fravor and Weapons Systems Officer Jim Slate, were operating advanced F/A-18F fighter jets, arguably the most sophisticated military aircraft ever created at that time. Machines worth tens of millions of dollars, equipped with advanced sensors and weapon systems. Yet even with their tray, binning and instruments, and the support of multiple radar installations aboard the carrier, they found themselves unable to explain what they witnessed on that clear November day. Fravor reported seeing the object abruptly mirror his jet's movements with precision, a maneuver that would require instantaneous directional change impossible for human pilots to withstand due to G-force constraints, the kind of acceleration that would crush human tissue and create forces that no mechanical structure could endure. The radar data from USS Princeton supported the visual accounts, allegedly capturing the UAP 60 miles away from Fravor's position in just seconds, implying velocities that exceed supersonic speeds without producing a sonic boom, a physical impossibility according to conventional aerodynamic understanding, violating the known principles of how objects behave at high velocity. The object exhibited no visible control surfaces, no wings, no exhaust plumes, nothing that would suggest conventional propulsion of any kind, no afterburners, no thrust vectoring, nothing that makes sense in terms of how aircraft actually function. Witnesses, including highly trained pilots with thousands of hours of flight experience, described it as appearing to accelerate so rapidly that the eye couldn't follow the motion, yet it maintained perfect stability and control throughout the encounter. The encounter lasted long enough for multiple observations and radar contacts, yet short enough that before Fravor could close to gun range, the object simply accelerated away and vanished. Years later, the Navy officially acknowledged the incident in declassified documentation, though officials remained cautious about drawing conclusions regarding the object's origin or nature. The encounter raised immediate questions about airspace security and the possibility that unknown objects could operate near military installations with complete impunity. The Theodore Roosevelt sightings. Between 2014 and 2015, pilots associated with the USS Theodore Roosevelt Carrier Strike Group were engaged in routine flight operations off the Virginia coast, in an area that has become known as a hotspot for UAP activity. When they recorded what would become the gimbal and go-fast video footage, two of the most significant UAP recordings in military possession, showing objects moving in ways that appeared to defy conventional physics and aeronautical limitations. Objects behaving in ways that trained pilots with thousands of hours of flight time could not reconcile with their understanding of how aircraft function. Former Navy pilot Lieutenant Ryan Graves described seeing these objects with such frequency that he mentioned encounters occurring every day for at least a couple of years. A consistency of sightings that suggested something systematic was occurring in that operational area rather than isolated or random events, something that was essentially routine for pilots operating in that specific region. The gimbal video, in particular, shows an object rotating on its axis while maintaining stable flight characteristics, something that should have induced catastrophic instability in any conventional aircraft design. Yet the object appeared unaffected by the gyroscopic effects that would normally cause violent oscillation. The go-fast video captures an object traveling at remarkable velocity across the ocean surface, its movement so rapid and erratic that it left experienced pilots struggling to explain the maneuvers, speeds that seemed impossible for anything visible to the naked eye and sensed by military radar. What made these recordings especially significant was that they were captured using advanced military sensor systems, infrared cameras, and radar, equipment specifically designed to detect and track aircraft. Yet the objects recorded displayed no infrared heat signature whatsoever, suggesting either that they operated at ambient temperature or that they generated propulsion without the thermal emissions characteristic of jet engines or rockets. The pilots themselves remained professional throughout their encounters, filing reports through proper military channels and following protocols for documentation of unusual events. Yet the military establishment seemed reluctant to thoroughly investigate the phenomenon or acknowledge its implications or prioritize understanding these repeated incursions. The sightings spiked dramatically in 2014 and 2015, suggesting either an escalation of activity or perhaps a change in operational patterns that made observation more frequent or noticeable to military personnel operating that specific airspace. The USS Omaha Transmedium incident. In July of 2019, aboard the guided missile destroyer USS Omaha, an infrared camera captured footage of an object that appeared to transition between air and water environments, performing what military analysts termed a transmedium maneuver, moving swiftly over the Pacific Ocean surface before descending directly into the ocean without producing a splash, wake, or visible disturbance of any kind. A capability that fundamentally contradicts all known technology and represents one of the most perplexing aspects of documented UAP phenomena. The Omaha's sophisticated sensor system, the AN/KAX-2, recorded the encounter. A stabilized turret equipped with digital video, night vision, and laser range-finding capabilities, military-grade equipment specifically designed to detect and track maritime and aerial objects with precision, equipment that the Navy relies on for situational awareness and threat detection. The spherical object appeared to hover just above the water surface, maintaining altitude and position, before dropping into the ocean at what witnesses described as considerable speed. Yet the water showed no disturbance, no foam, no indication that anything had entered it, no wave pattern, no observable impact signature, suggesting either that the object possessed properties allowing it to pass through water without displacement, or that some technological principle entirely unknown to conventional physics was at work, something that the human mind struggles to comprehend. The Pentagon verified the footage as authentic, confirming that the recording came from military equipment and documented a genuine encounter, lending credibility to what would otherwise seem like science fiction, though officials remained circumspect about what the footage actually demonstrated or what conclusions should be drawn from it. The transmedium nature of the encounter raised questions about whether these objects operated according to different physical laws or possessed materials and propulsion systems fundamentally different from anything developed by human engineers, suggesting that whatever controlled these objects possessed knowledge or technology centuries or millennia beyond current human capability. If such technology existed, the implications for military strategy, naval operations, and overall national security appeared substantial. Yet the incident received relatively limited public attention compared to other documented cases, perhaps because the transmedium capability seemed so far beyond human comprehension that discussing it openly seemed to strain credibility. The Yemen missile engagement. On October 30, 2024, an incident occurred off the coast of Yemen that remains among the most dramatic recent declassifications, when a U.S. military MQ-9 Reaper drone, operating under what officials described as standard military engagement protocols in an active conflict zone, fired a Hellfire missile at what pilots identified as an unidentified high-speed object, a direct military engagement with a UAP that made headlines when Republican Congressman Eric Burleson of Missouri publicly unveiled the footage during official congressional testimony, creating a moment of genuine public acknowledgement of military engagement with unexplained phenomena. According to Burleson's account, based on whistleblower documentation that he claimed had undergone independent analysis, the missile appeared to strike the object directly with visible impact, yet the object appeared to continue its course unimpeded, with Burleson stating that it kept going and it looked like the debris was taken with it, suggesting that either the missile failed to hit its target despite appearances, or that the object possessed structural integrity far exceeding any conventional aircraft, something that would require either extraordinary materials science or technological principles not yet understood by human engineers. The implications of this encounter were staggering, suggesting that direct weapons engagement with these phenomena might prove ineffective, which raises said questions about whether military defenses could adequately respond to such objects if hostile intent were demonstrated. What would happen if these objects attacked American military positions with purpose and intent? The footage represented one of the first instances where actual weapons fire was directed at a documented UAP, making it perhaps the most significant combat-related incident in the history of documented UAP encounters. The first time that military escalation procedures were implemented against confirmed anomalous phenomena. Congressman Burleson emphasized that the video underwent independent review and came from credible military sources, lending weight to the authenticity of the footage despite its extraordinary nature and the extraordinary claims it seemed to demonstrate. The incident occurred amid rising military tensions in the Yemen region following Houthi rebel attacks on commercial shipping and maritime infrastructure, adding geopolitical context to the encounter and suggesting that these phenomena might be attracted to areas of conflict or military activity. The failure or apparent ineffectiveness of the missile strike raised uncomfortable questions about military preparedness and the adequacy of current weapons systems for addressing phenomena that clearly operated beyond conventional technological parameters. The Rendlesham Forest Encounter. On December 26, 1980, outside RAF Woodbridge in Suffolk, England, a United States Air Force base serving NATO military purposes, military security personnel witnessed a series of unexplained lights and objects that descended into nearby Rendlesham Forest, an incident that became known as Britain's Roswell and remains among the most credible and well-documented UAP events in military history, involving testimony from multiple credible witnesses, including U.S. Air Force personnel with no apparent motive to fabricate extraordinary claims. Deputy Base Commander Lieutenant Colonel Charles the Thirster Halt, a career military officer with substantial responsibility and no apparent reason to jeopardize his career with false claims, responded to reports of the incident and brought his tape recorder, creating an audio recording that became declassified decades later and remains one of the most valuable pieces of evidence from any UAP encounter, captured in real time as the incident unfolded with audible tension and confusion, with Halt describing his observations and the observations of the military personnel accompanying him as they attempted to approach and investigate the phenomenon in the darkness of the forest. Security patrolman Jim Peniston and John Burroughs reported witnessing a triangular craft emitting bright, multicolored lights and bearing markings that Peniston described as resembling hieroglyphic symbols. Claims that seemed bizarre, yet consistent with other accounts from credible witnesses at other locations and other times, suggesting either convergent descriptions of the same phenomenon or genuine observation of similar objects. Peniston alleged physical contact with the craft and described experiencing what he interpreted as a telepathic communication or transfer of binary code, data that he claimed appeared in his notebook during the encounter. An account that seemed even more extraordinary, yet was corroborated by contemporary military records and Peniston's own documented notes from that night. Evidence that seemed to suggest something beyond conventional military technology or hoax. The animals on a nearby farm reportedly reacted with extreme agitation, bolting and running, suggesting that whatever the witnesses encountered produced effects perceptible to non-human biological systems, a detail that added weight to the accounts despite the extraordinary nature of the claims and provided independent corroborate. Ion from non-human observers. In 2015, more than 3 decades after the initial incident, Halt claimed to have obtained statements from radar operators at RAF Bentwaters confirming that they had tracked an unidentified object moving at extraordinary velocity on the night of December 26th, with operators claiming the object traversed their 60-mile scope in just 2 to 3 seconds, implying speeds in the thousands of miles per hour, impossible acceleration and velocity for any known aircraft or missile. Despite Halt's claims about radar confirmation, no official radar records have been released to the public, leaving open questions about what evidence actually supports the account and what documentation remains classified, suggesting that certain information about the incident was considered sensitive enough to withhold from public disclosure even decades after the event. The Vandenberg Air Force Base incidents. Between 2003 and 2005, near Vandenberg Air Force Base in California, one of the most sensitive military installations in the United States and home to critical weapons testing, a former military police officer with 16 years of service in the Air Force reported multiple possible UAP incursions into restricted airspace, incidents that occurred within the strictly controlled airspace surrounding one of the nation's most sensitive military installations, an area specifically designated for classified weapons testing and development and protected by sophisticated air defense systems designed to prevent any unauthorized intrusions. Vandenberg hosts test flights of advanced weapons systems and strategic missile platforms, making it among the most closely monitored and protected airspace in North America, with multiple layers of radar coverage and surveillance systems. Yet somehow unknown objects apparently penetrated this airspace and operated without being intercepted or eliminated, raising questions about either the sophistication of these objects' defensive or stealth capabilities that exceeded American technology, or the limitations of military detection and response systems that were supposed to be state-of-the-art. The timing of these incidents, occurring during a period when advanced military technology was being developed and tested at the installation, suggested that whatever was occurring might be attempting to observe or monitor sensitive military activities, conducting what amounted to hostile reconnaissance of American weapons programs and technologies, or perhaps was simply transiting through a region where it was more likely to be detected by military sensors and therefore more likely to be documented. The clustering of incidents near such sensitive facilities raised fundamental questions about whether these phenomena displayed intentional strategic interest in U.S. military infrastructure, suggesting intelligence, planning, and deliberate targeting of sensitive locations, or whether the concentration of surveillance systems at military installations simply made detection more likely in those specific locations. A question that military analysts found deeply troubling and worthy of serious investigation. The Vandenberg incidents contributed to a broader pattern of UAP sightings near nuclear weapons facilities, strategic installations, and sensitive military sites throughout the United States, a pattern that prompted military officials and researchers to question whether some intelligence or organizational capability directed these objects to these specific locations with purpose and strategy. ARO, the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office established by the Biden administration in 2022, identified 18 reports of UAP sightings near U.S. nuclear weapons sites across multiple states and facilities, with some incidents involving flights lasting multiple hours over sensitive areas. 10 of those involving flights of approximately 5 minutes over the sensitive areas, while 2 involved flights lasting nearly 1 hour and 2 hours respectively, suggesting persistence and deliberate positioning rather than random transits through the region. The Vandenberg incidents provided part of the foundation for official military acknowledgement that UAP activity concentrated near sensitive installations represented a genuine concern requiring investigation and analysis. The nuclear weapons facility overflights. The ARO documented 18 verified reports of UAP sightings near U.S. nuclear weapons facilities across the country. Incidents that ranged from brief appearances lasting just minutes to prolonged overflights lasting nearly 2 full hours, with each case involving only 1 or 2 identified objects, suggesting coordinated observation or systematic surveillance rather than random or multiple separate intrusions. A level of organization and purpose that defied simple explanation as natural phenomena or mundane misidentifications. The concentration of UAP activity near nuclear weapons storage facilities weapons development installations, and strategic military sites created a pattern that military officials found deeply concerning, raising fundamental questions about whether these phenomena represented foreign technological threats far exceeding American military capabilities, terrestrial phenomena not yet understood by mainstream science, or something entirely different and more mysterious, something that challenged the fundamental assumptions underlying national security strategy. The persistent nature of these incidents, occurring across multiple locations and spanning years of documented military observation, suggested that whatever mechanism produced these sightings was not a temporary anomaly or isolated occurrence, but rather an ongoing phenomenon that demanded serious scientific and military investigation, suggesting that something systematic was monitoring American nuclear capabilities. Military officials expressed particular concern about the implications of these incidents, specifically the apparent ability of these objects to operate near the most sensitive military installations with apparent impunity, suggesting either a technological capability far exceeding current human understanding or a deliberate disregard for established perimeter security and military protocols, a capability that essentially nullified assumptions about military superiority and deterrence. The clustering of incidents at nuclear weapons facilities rather than random locations worldwide suggested intentionality, that whatever intelligence or capability directed these objects had specific interest in the most sensitive aspects of U.S. military infrastructure, possibly suggesting reconnaissance or intelligence gathering regarding American nuclear capabilities. Former military officials testified to Congress about the genuine national security implications of these incidents, emphasizing that understanding the nature and origin of these phenomena should rank among the highest priorities of the Department of Defense, regardless of the political or social implications of any eventual findings, stating that continued ignorance posed unacceptable risks to national security. The Congressional UAP testimonies. In 2025, multiple former military officers testified before congressional panels investigating UAP phenomena, providing detailed accounts of personal encounters that left these trained military professionals shaken by their experiences, incidents that seemed to have profound psychological and emotional effects beyond mere tactical or technical concerns, transforming how these experienced military personnel understood reality and their place within it. Former Air Force intelligence officer Dylan Borland described an encounter involving 4 distinct lights and the overwhelming sensation of static electricity permeating his entire body during the incident, a physical sensation that persisted even as he attempted to process the visual phenomena he was witnessing, suggesting that these objects generated electromagnetic fields or energy that affected human physiology directly, possibly damaging or altering neural tissue. Retired Air Force officer Jeffrey Nucitelli testified that when the object approached the military position, chaos erupted over the radio communications system, the normal discipline and professionalism of military communication breaking down into visible panic, with him hearing his colleagues screaming, "It's coming right at us," an expression of genuine fear and concern from trained military personnel operating sophisticated weapons systems. Men who had been trained to remain calm under stress and follow protocols even under extreme circumstances. Nucitelli emphasized that the experience fundamentally changed how he understood reality itself, stating, "What we saw changed our lives, the way we think about everything. It was incredibly profound," suggesting that these encounters produced effects on witnesses beyond simple visual documentation or technical data collection, creating existential shifts in understanding that couldn't be communicated through normal military reporting channels. Air Force veterans and current military personnel provided consistent accounts of sightings occurring near sensitive military installations, describing objects that appeared to eclipse existing weapons and technology in terms of performance capabilities, maneuverability, acceleration, and technological sophistication, suggesting that humanity faced something technologically different and potentially superior to current military capabilities, raising uncomfortable questions about military superiority and the adequacy of American defense systems. The willingness of military officers to testify publicly about these experiences represented a significant shift in official acknowledgement and treatment of UAP phenomena, moving away from decades of secrecy and dismissal toward open discussion and congressional investigation of these incidents, suggesting that political pressure and the weight of accumulated evidence had forced acknowledgement that these phenomena could no longer be dismissed or ignored by government institutions. The European Sensor Limitation Incident. In 2024, footage designated PR-017 captured over European airspace by military sensor systems that should have been more than adequate for detailed documentation and analysis presented a case that exemplified the fundamental challenge in UAP analysis, an incident where even sophisticated military instrumentation failed to capture sufficient data for definitive identification or explanation of the phenomenon, raising critical questions about the nature of these objects and how they interact with detection equipment. The All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, when reviewing the footage with access to all available military intelligence and sensor data from the incident, explicitly acknowledged that the collected data was insufficient for determination, a candid admission that represented a notable shift from historical military practice of forcing conclusions onto ambiguous evidence or dismissing inconvenient reports entirely. A shift that suggested changing institutional attitudes toward rigorous analysis and scientific honesty. The PR-017 incident highlighted a critical limitation in current military sensor technology, specifically the inability to consistently capture complete datasets that would allow for rigorous scientific analysis and definitive conclusions regarding UAP characteristics and operational parameters, suggesting that either the objects had capabilities that defeated current sensor systems or that something fundamental about the phenomena was resistant to clear documentation. This acknowledgement of insufficient data, rather than dismissive rejection or forced explanation, suggested that the current military approach to UAP investigation had become more methodologically honest and scientifically rigorous than historical practices, reflecting perhaps a recognition that forced conclusions served no one and damaged institutional credibility and public trust. The European incident contributed to the growing recognition that many UAP encounters might defy clear categorization or explanation, not because evidence was false or witnesses unreliable, but because the phenomena themselves appeared to operate at the edge of current sensor capabilities and analytical frameworks, suggesting a significant asymmetry between the technology of the observed objects and the technology attempting to observe them. The ARO's willingness to publicly state that certain incidents remained unresolved, even when documented by military equipment and analysis, represented meaningful progress in transparency and honesty regarding the actual state of human UAP understanding, an acknowledgement that gaps in human knowledge existed and could not be simply dismissed or explained away. The drone countermeasure failure. In multiple incidents documented by AARO throughout 2023 and 2024, military and government agencies detected what appeared to be coordinated UAP activity near sensitive installations across the continental United States, incidents that seemed to demonstrate that standard military defensive systems and countermeasures might be ineffective against these phenomena, a possibility that military planners found deeply troubling and worthy of urgent attention, suggesting that existing military assumptions about defense capabilities might require fundamental revision and restructuring. The apparent failure of conventional military technology to intercept, engage, or effectively counter these objects suggested that adversaries or unknown entities operating these systems possessed technological capabilities substantially beyond current human military development, representing a strategic disadvantage of profound proportions that could threaten national security, or that the phenomena themselves operated according to physical principles not yet understood by mainstream military science, something so foreign to human experience that conventional weapons seemed irrelevant and impotent. North American Aerospace Defense Command and U.S. Northern Command reported increasing frequencies of reports concerning unexplained drone and UAP incursions, specifically near sensitive military installations and critical infrastructure sites, with the clustering of these incidents suggesting systematic rather than random activity, suggesting purpose and organization and deliberate targeting. The failure of standard air defense systems to effectively engage these objects, combined with the apparent indifference of UAP to military presence or defensive measures, suggested either complete confidence in the superiority of the technology or a fundamental inability of conventional weapons to engage phenomena operating at different physical parameters, rendering billions of dollars of military investment potentially obsolete and ineffective. Military planners expressed grave concerns about the implications of these incidents for national defense. Specifically, the question of how military strategy could adequately address threats that appeared immune to conventional countermeasures and operating with apparent impunity within U.S. airspace, raising existential questions about military doctrine and strategy that had been fundamental assumptions for decades. The crisis of military explanation. Across all these documented incidents, a consistent pattern emerges that challenges established military and scientific orthodoxy regarding what phenomena can exist and operate within human-controlled airspace. A pattern suggesting that either human understanding of physical law remains incomplete and fundamentally flawed, or that human technology, whether terrestrial or otherwise, has achieved capabilities that official government channels have yet to acknowledge or adequately explain to the American public. Capabilities that would reshape how humanity understands its place in the universe and its relationship to the cosmos. The All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office received 757 reports of unidentified anomalous phenomena between May 2023 and June 2024, yet resolved only 118 cases through conventional explanation, leaving the vast majority either pending analysis or definitively unresolved despite military documentation and access to classified sensor data from the most sophisticated equipment available to military services. The persistent failure of official channels to provide satisfactory explanations for these incidents, combined with the apparent systematic interest these phenomena display in sensitive military installations and nuclear weapons facilities, creates a national security context that demands urgent resolution, yet remains stubbornly resistant to conventional investigation methodologies, suggesting that whatever these objects represent exists fundamentally outside the frameworks used to understand military threats and strategic vulnerabilities. The congressional mandates for UAP transparency and whistleblower protection suggest that elected officials recognize that the public and legislative branches of government have been inadequately informed regarding the scope and implications of UAP phenomena, an information gap that some argue represents a dangerous vulnerability in democratic oversight of military and intelligence operations, and that classified suppression of information serves no legitimate national security interest and violates constitutional principles. These 10 declassified encounters represent not anomalies in human experience, but rather systematic documentation of phenomena that appear to operate outside the boundaries of conventional military and scientific understanding. Phenomena that persist despite decades of military investigation, despite classified research programs, despite the commitment of substantial resources to understanding them, suggesting that understanding might require fundamentally new theoretical frameworks and approaches. What remains unresolved is not whether these incidents occurred, but why human institutions have struggled so profoundly to explain them. What this inability to explain them suggests about the completeness of human understanding, and whether the public deserves full transparency regarding encounters that apparently challenge the fundamental assumptions underlying modern military strategy and scientific worldview.